another connection here is that the way I use tree leaves is really, especially for storing, is really integrated with how I'm collecting herbaceous loose hay. And there's this other connection too, in that a lot of the pruning I'm doing to get tree fodder is also what's getting the material to make snads that's bringing in that herbaceous hay. So it all fits together really elegantly, and that's kind of like really the thesis of what I want to talk about is how feeding tree fodder and feeding herbaceous layer fodders is like, it's not like an either or thing, even in storage, and they go together very compatibly. So those tree leaves there would, I think there's some maple and some yellow birch there on top, and that would have been, this is in western Massachusetts, where my father and stepmother had a farm where I was still living last spring, and I would take the goats out for foraging walks a couple times a day, and if I didn't happen to need a siesta while I was going out with them, which was sometimes the case, I just bring a book and lay down and hope goats I don't fall asleep and then get into trouble. But if I had the energy, I'd bring along a big hiking backpack, and then I'd be climbing trees and dropping limbs, and they'd be eating off of that and any other stuff. And then when I had a bunch dropped, I'd go down and just start stripping it by hand into the backpack, so that when we, carrying a whole bunch of branches, this is like steep country there, and hauling big bundles uphill quickly got tiresome. So it was a lot easier for me to have a backpack stuffed just with the leaves, and so it's like they fill their rumens, I fill my big external rumen, we go back up the hill, and I would dump it, strip leaves, right onto already, mostly dry hay. I mean, none of this needs to be as dry as, like there's a few bales there you can see on the right, and bale hay needs to be way drier than any of this needs to be because of the pressure it's under, and it doesn't have a chance to continue drying later. And one of the things I was finding with these stripped leaves is that they dry so fast. I wouldn't have to have any time at all with them out in the sun. They could just go straight into the loft, and then they stay. The sun really, people think like, oh, rain ruins your hay. It's actually the sun that's ruining the hay, and the rain means you had to leave it out too long to get it dry. And so these leaves that are, maybe that's an oversimplification, but anyways, these leaves haven't spent any time drying in the sun, and I mean, if you're somebody who feeds ruminants, just like your mouth starts watering when you look at this kind of stuff.
Yeah, me.
And so, kind of since I started doing that, I've found that I can do a lot of tree fodder work actually just with my hands. I often cutting larger limbs. I'm going to use a saw or loppers or something. But there's some of the best species for tree fodder also happen to be ones that are really easy to just like, maybe the two best examples are like willow and ash.
Poplar snap's pretty good too.
Yeah, poplar's another great one. You can really just run your hand down branches, and the new growth, small twigs and leaves attached to them just comes off really easily. I don't think there's any tool.
Striped maple also.
Yeah.
Norway maple's pretty snappy.
Yeah, and lately I've been even doing it with cherry, actually. Mm-hmm. Finding cherry pretty easy to snap. I mean, it's not quite as easy as...
You have to go back on itself, kind of.
But I can, where possible, when I can do it with my hands, it's way faster than I could do it with any tool. It's just, because inevitably, whatever...
We have two of them.
Yeah, and you need to be picking up and putting down whatever tool you're using, and so, getting back to what Shana was saying about how labor-intensive this is, part of that is the question of what's our standard of, like, how much should we have to work for our living?
And/or what else are you doing at the same time, and whether it's your downtime or your enjoyable time,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
versus all considered work, you know?
So I'm finding that for me, making, feeling like I'm getting enough done in the time that I put into it, focusing on species like that I can just strip and break down in my hand is way, like I love to feed apple. I'm actually still, trees that don't need to be invigorated particularly. I'm still doing a lot of apple pruning now of, vigorous kind of teenage and trees right in their prime that maybe I didn't get to prune earlier, and so I'm getting to them now. The goats love that, but apple is one that's really hard for me to strip. And break by hand. So.
But it's also one that they'll eat the bark of, so if you give them bigger pieces, it's just gaumy stuff to deal with later.
That's what I've been doing now, yeah.
I will say Michael Walder in Ontario, he had arborist experience before he became his arborist for his goats, and he has a meat operation with quite a few goats, and that's what they make their living on for the family, and he has quite a few children, so it's quite a lot of goats. And I think he was doing 300 pounds edible portion with a bill hook in 2 hours. 300 pounds. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But he does it every single day.
Yeah.
And he was an arborist before. So,
Yeah, and I think it also depends a lot on what you're able to select from for trees.
Yes.
Like
and I'm sure he's doing more than that, because that was his initial prunings.
If you have other humans that you need to come to agreements on about what you're doing, that slows shit down. To me, that's like the number one bottleneck in getting shit done is having to coordinate with people. So.
And yet, historically, there were whole crews that came up the river to harvest the leaf hay for people, but they had it down.
On the same page. I'm talking more having
cross-cultural.
who don't really understand and have certain, preconceived aesthetic ideas.
Yeah.
That's the number one problem I run into. So, I think
it's good if you can own your piece of land.
And then definitely once you've started, pruning certain trees, it just gets, like I've gotten to do a little bit now of repruning harvesting the first regrowth from trees that I pollard and coppiced, and that's so much faster than the first time.
And more nutritious.
So that's been really fun.
And there are opportunities, like people don't mind as much if it's like under their phone line or their power line, or like there's a lot of pollarding that goes on, by default, kind of. Edges of things that people want back.
So the other piece of this I just wanted to make sure to touch on, is the collecting, material for making tools to do more of this while you're, getting tree fodder for the animals. And it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I'm actually trying to make a business out of it. And it's something that anybody who is interested in doing these kind of things, I want to encourage and support it. So I don't want to bend your ear for too long, but if this is interesting to you, I could probably talk ad nauseum about it. So one of the things that I think is really an important strategy is, that when sometimes if I'm, trying to help somebody learn, somebody wants to make their own staff, so, fit the blade they have, or, maybe they have some staff they don't like, and I try to make sure people understand that, I don't recommend going out to the woods, I'm going to go find a staff today. That's going to, be a big waste of time.
But you can come to Shana's woods and find quite a few.
You need to just go find one, go to Shana's, because some samples I brought today, I just quickly went by Shana's.
The reason being that there's piles that were cut for the goats. Piles of wood that are small branch material from tops of trees.
Yeah. So, but even in that case, right, it's the point being that there's all this material to sort through.
To choose from.
And so, so what I try to do is, I have a notion of what shapes I'm looking for, and I'm basically, as I'm piecing brush up that I've cut, for the fodder, I'm without thinking about it too much, I'm just like anything that's more or less what I'm in the range of what I'm looking for, I've trained myself, I don't cut right at a joint. That might be a grip. Cut 4 inches over, so I don't even have to think about it anymore. Then I get this big pile of stuff that I can sort through later. Half of it might end up being firewood or just being left to rot somewhere. But then I've got, 10 times as much potential material as I need when I actually need, when I go, I need something to make the snap for this person. And if I had just, I've got one snap, maybe it's not quite right for, their height and the blade they want to use and the way they stand. So having this, overabundance of material that I don't even need all of it ends up saving me a lot of time because I'm not, I could stand there just examining each piece before I, throw it aside, but it's just, I don't know, there's not time for that.
Find one, any shape you need.
So, and I'm also, one idea that I've had is in this business that I'm trying to get going, I'm also open to if there's other folks who, handle a lot of brush and are interested in learning what to look for, I'd love to kind of work with other people to help them get started collecting stuff because at some point I might even be in a position to
need more.
Buy a bunch of material from, I might need suppliers at that point yet, but I just want to encourage folks to make snacks.
And there's other things, because I was making mangers for a while for folks, which I can show people a picture of if you ask me later, with bent wood that's out of my goat pile, and all kinds of things you can do. Back to your slides about the drying. So you had told me that sometimes you layer the leaves right in with the hay, and that if you have slightly damper hay, that's a strategy. That you can actually put it in a little damper if you layer it with the twigs. At least that was my understanding. Is that?
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
I haven't done it quite like that.
Okay.
Mostly because the tree hay that I'm bringing in is not at all dry.
Right.
When I'm bringing it in there, I'm not trying to mix it with any other stuff that's not dry.
Right.
enough.
Right.
I'm actually trying to put it. Oftentimes, with loose hay, I'm, practically speaking, just as concerned with stuff getting over dried as I am with it being under dried. So more often I'll do something like, I've got a layer of hay, this stuff's crackling dry, and maybe I need to pack it down still, but I don't even want to touch it because it's going to just start shattering
crackling.
These nice leaves. I'll put a layer of, tree hay on top of that, and it'll...
As a bed spring.
Yeah, it'll cushion it a bit, and it'll lend it a little bit more moisture, to get it back up. I don't want it too dry, so then I can tramp it all down together and...
Okay, so it does sometimes get layered in.
Yes.
But it's a different order than I was picturing.
Right.
That's neat.
Right. You had a question?
Sure. What is a snap?
Okay, so a snap is the whole wooden portion of the side. There's some samples I have on a table.
Basically the long handle that you have little grips off of.
Sure.
Yep.
This is all stuff that was, this shaft was not collected necessarily for tree fodder, but this was something that somebody had just discarded that I picked up. The snap refers to everything wooded in either of these. Yeah. Susan, did you have a question?
I was not clear on how you're drying that. Are you putting loose hay down that's fairly dry and then putting the tree fodder on top
Yeah.
after the tree fodder has dried, or semi?
No, when the tree fodder is just coming straight into the barn. But I'm not doing too thick of a layer at one time. So if I happened to be bringing in a lot at once, that's all right.
That's really dry.
Yeah. That's my drying surface. I spread it out to 27% moisture. So, this was probably just actually like one really
One bundle
stuffed
that-
backpack full.
Right.
Because I'm like packing it in there, and then I come back from my go walk, and I spread it out on top of that hay there, and I don't know how to tell you what's the right thickness of a layer. I mean, that's
Depends how dry it is.
I'm just thinking that if it's an easier way to keep it, I will pop open the bales of it dry, and put another layer of hay. Is it going to
You could do that. I mean, you could also just do it. I mean, because once you've got your hay in a bale, it's mighty convenient to have it baled. Like
But I also break them.
right, yeah.
So you always end up having loose hay, even from bales.
Right. I mean, you could also be putting, like, if I had bales at various times, there was, tree hay spread out on top of these bales stacked here too. I wouldn't. And then go ahead.
It might be easier, because the only way I know to do them is the lazy person way, which is to tie them in a string,
Right.
throw them up over the barn thing, and just let them dry
Right.
right there on the tree branch.
Right.
That's
Well, I mean,
how I did it.
yeah. I mean, for me, this is my lazy way because I don't want to lug all the branches up the hill.
That's the other part,
Yeah.
and then once they eat the leaves or the tree bark or whatever, then
Yeah.
you've got all a big pile of brush
Yeah.
to pull out of the barn.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, there's trade-offs either way. And actually, later in this year, this got filled in with more hay, and then I ended up moving away, and more bales got stacked on top of all that later on. So that this was, there was loose hay and tree leaves all mixed together, and then filled up with bales stacked on top.
Yeah.
So we probably should move soon to the next
Okay.
speaker, because I know I started a half an hour late.
Just about 20 minutes.
Okay. Any other questions?
I was wondering, do you turn that as it's drying, or does it just dry through you over time? And then when it is dry, what do you do with it? Like, do you put it somewhere else and make room for more to dry there, or is that like its ultimate place where it hangs out until it's never ends?
So yeah, the hay was staying here until being fed out. Some of it's still there now, actually quite a bit of it, I think. So these kind of square-sided stacks, those aren't going to be moved again, right? That's their like final formation until they're fed out. These piles here, those are going to get that stuff that's not yet dry enough to put away. So I do those stacks so there's kind of airflow around them, and that's going to get then spread out on top of those surfaces and maybe flipped over. They'll have various manipulations done to them to help them keep drying.
But they end up into some more of those square stacks
Yeah, I want to show
later.
you one of
And
the,
there might or might not be leaf fodder layers in those.
right. Just want to show you one other picture to give you an idea of kind of here's a little sequence of pictures. This is the when I moved, I then was working in this barn for the next couple months. This is one of the barns. So this is another stack. This is kind of how it was started. These are actually there's some distinct rectangular sections that are straight-sided so that you can draw from them separately without it all being tied together. And I think I have a sequence of photos that shows how it kind of builds up over time, if I can figure out how to go between them. And that's actually me packing some stuff down.
And that goes for even if you're putting in whole branches. You always want to keep things kind of like with whole branches drying I can put them in and not even dry them extra first because there's just more space with the extra wood, but it takes a lot more room. But I know folks in Vermont that have this huge barn, and so they don't care about the space, and they just put in these big branches. But I usually point the bundles different directions so that you can get out those same distinct arm loads, because when it all gets meshed together, it's much harder and more shattering and everything else.
Right, that's important with herbaceous plants too. That
right, and or smaller strip leaf stuff that could be in there.
So then this is that same barn we're just looking at, and it's getting built up higher on the sides, and we're actually kind of building like stair sections going up so I can get up on top to still be packing it and packing it down the sides of the barn. And there's one more picture showing it almost full at the end of the season. And then
those are beautiful.
that would even get filled in, like that got all filled in.
Can you make it whole screen?
Yeah.
Ta-da.
So that whole barn coming out further this way got filled into this height, and then at the end I was like crawling along like a miner with tarpaulins to just like keep packing it into the ridge line there.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if those...
Is it okay to start moving on? So any other questions, last questions for Cy for now? And we'll also be able to pick each other's brains in the afternoon while we're doing stuff. And if people want to know how traditional stacking works, you can pick my brain about that later. So, thank you, Cy. Yay. Susan, you're up. So this is Susan Littlefield from Wine Nut Farm, my good friend up the road. And it took really a lot of arm twisting to get her here.
If there was 12 people here, I wouldn't have stayed.
So, they're right
Make sure
here.
there's no volume.
There's no volume.
No, it would be better probably if there was no volume.
Okay. Alright. So let's.
Because you can talk in person
Well,
about the
because
pictures.
I might have hollered at the dog and said, bad dog,
Okay.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to grab some more tea while you're... Maybe I'll do that. At least grab my tea.
As big as we're gonna get, I think.
There you go.
Oh, that's beautiful. Look quick, everybody. Susan's sheep have come.
Yeah. The goats actually taught the sheep more about trees than I probably ever did. But we were pruning some pine trees and some fir and hemlock a few winters ago, and we just had a big pile of it in the truck, and we brought it home. We just threw it in with them. Didn't know if they'd eat it or not, and they love it. They especially like the pine. And so then there's a tree over here on the corner behind that little outbuilding next to the barn that is a Norway maple that broke a lot of limbs off. It's also hangs over their pasture, and they eat the leaves as high as they can reach. And when that broke, we threw it in. Then we had sumac and cherry growing on the other side of the other barn, and the goats started eating it day one that we got them. They were out there chewing that sucker down. It was becoming invasive in the side of the barn. You couldn't even see the whole side of the sumac and the cherry.
By the way, it's been years since there were goats there, except for my goats visiting. This is all sheep now,
Yeah.
but they remember.
And I said, well, if the goats will eat it, maybe the sheep will. So we started whacking it down and throwing it over the fence. And then,
Oh, and by the way, they have access to the best grassland. This is not a closed fence that they're stuck in this yard with. They have all kinds of good pasture. They're choosing the leaves first.
yeah,
Anyway, sorry to interrupt,
we
but
can't convince them to go eat grass. This time they hang out in the barn. It's a cool shade, but you can see some of the bales that are in the feeder there that I'm fussy. If they seem at all green or at all heavy, I pop them open and feed it right out. I don't even take the chance because, I'm just a girl. haying, and I've been told by many people I don't know what I'm doing. But the tree fodder is really interesting. I cut my cherry, and I kept the birch, maple,
Susan makes good hay.
and we just tie it like when you cut the tree down and have all that brush. We just tie it up. I drag it up to the barn on the tractor, and I throw it over the beam and just let it dry there, because I didn't know you could just rip it all off. It just seemed easier to do it that way, and then you just take a whole bunch of those limbs and throw them in the dead of winter.
So how long are those pieces that you're in your bundle that you're dragging? How long?
How long?
Yeah. Like as long as you, or shorter?
No,
Shorter.
Well, I usually cut them in half because I have to handle them. So I'm
Right.
going to say they're 3 feet to 4
Okay.
feet long.
Yep.
And we try to just put all the
So just a
ends-
little bit longer than traditional sheaves would have been. Very
Okay.
close. Very close
Yeah,
to traditional.
just whatever's manageable.
And whatever's kind of the leafy part, so it depends on
Yeah.
your tree too, right?
Yeah, I don't want the trunk in there. I know they'll eat the bark, but it's just...
It's too heavy to carry.
Well, it's too much of a hassle when they're all done with it,
Right.
and you're trying to clean the barn out, and then you've got all this wood...
Tangled together.
Or it gets caught in the spreader, and...
Because the sheep, unlike the goats, will eat off the ground. My goats won't eat it once it gets on the ground. So.
Yeah. Sheep will eat it right off the ground. Because that's all concrete and tar in there, so it's not very muddy. But when Shana brings over the fodder for him and we put it in there...
Because I had a SARE grant, and she was one of my demonstration farms for feeding my samples to her sheep.
The first thing they do is yank it out and drag it on the ground and eat it, rather than trying to stick their head through the thing.
The manger, yep.
Yeah.
Even though it's a really nice manger.
Yeah,
It's like really long along both sides of her barn.
yeah. But I've been shocked, and I've also been very impressed. Dr. Weber, University of Maine, he does the Icelandics up there, and I had asked him what he thought about feeding out the tree fodder. And I said, because I've had a really low Comanche counts, I've been very pleased that...
Which is barber pole worm, which can kill animals, sheep or goats. And I, like most people I know, have had a death from that. And neither Susan nor I have you ever?
Yes.
You have had a
I
death from
had
it? Okay.
death. That's why I went to the Comanche, because you, as a commercial
Which is
person-
telling the color inside their eyelids
Mhm.
with comparing it to a color card because it makes them anemic, so you can pick up on who has it. Go ahead, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. At one point, I had over 100 sheep, and we were milking them. And when you try to do that big, you try to follow all the commercial rules, which is worm, and grain, and rotational graze. But I found that doesn't necessarily work. I think that they need to have more diversity. They need to have the tannins that are in the tree bark and in the leaves is what you're buying when you buy the herbal warmer. You're buying tanning agents from the trees. So if you can feed it out to them, not a constant diet is probably fine, but I mean mixed with the pastures and everything else, I think you'll find that your egg counts or your Comanche counts will be lower in your animals. So
And you're that university guy, he
said that,
tracking a whole bunch of farms, right?
yes, and he came to the farm, and this was funny. We were chasing sheep to get fresh manure so that they could sample it. And after doing this for 2 days, 2 separate days, 2 separate weeks, he would have one of his interns come to the farm, and we would get fresh manure from the girls. And my egg or worm count was lower than a lot of the others in the test, and he said, what are you doing differently? And the only thing I was doing differently was feeding out tree fodder or tree limbs to them, because sheep, I didn't find that sheep would naturally eat the trees like goats would. And he thought that that would be maybe the contributing difference, because when he came back in another week, it hadn't come up or gone down. It was still consistently lower than a lot of the other farms, so.
Right, and so now I've just put in a pre-proposal that actually involves testing on Elliott's sheep at Meadowsweet Farm. If they fall for it, then I have to write something this fall, and then they have to still,
Yep.
So if we get it, we'll be doing a lot of sheep testing on parasites related to tree fodder.
Yeah.
Because a lot of anecdotal evidence like this, but not really great studies for our area about that.
Yeah, I mean, the
So-
girls, because I've only got 7 now, so it's no big deal. But,
Can you talk a little about tree species, the evergreens? I mean, you were telling me that they eat pine even in the summer,
yeah,
and
they love pine.
they eat differently than my goats do.
They're
Her
pine
sheep
needles.
are very strange compared to my goats.
My sheep are pine needles is their favorite.
Even in the summer.
It'll eat them in the summer. Yeah.
And these are sheep that are going out into a pasture, and there's even some bushy edges, right, that they have
Yep.
access to.
Yeah.
They're not super hungry or anything, they're just.
No, they're not. They
Right, exactly. It's not out of starvation. That's for sure.
Look at
And they're fat, too.
They're quite round.
Do you have?
East region.
East region. Do
They're
you know
dairy.
Dairy sheep.
East region, is there is there other studies on, which sheep do better with?
Well, what does she have?
Well, I will say that the different sheep groups that I've brought samples to, each group has different preferences. And I would also say that there's differences in soils and in the same species in a different site. And they're also grading, what they have to choose from. And they're also having microbial changes to adjust to different feeds. So if something's something that they've been eating, they'll have the microbes to digest it. Like, first thing in the spring, my goats always seem to have to adjust to white birch, because the microbial populations that digest that maybe have to increase first before they can really eat a lot of it. Deer, I have a study that tracks that in deer, that their microbes change populations depending on the season. So that could be part of it, a small part probably. But I figure they know what they're doing.
That's what I feel.
I know, donkeys in England and Susan's sheep don't really like apple, and everything else in the world devours apple trees. Donkeys, I know, they get too fat if you give them good hay. They're better off with straw. They're desert animals. They eat dried, awful plants that aren't very nutritious, and maybe it's too rich for them. I don't know. But the animals will tell you.
Yeah, the goats could not go near the apple trees because they would rip the bark right off them. The sheep, there's apple trees in their pastures. They don't care. They don't want anything to do with it until they go up and rub on the tree and
But they
strip
stripped the ash tree.
They did, and that made no sense. They girdled a giant ash tree that we had all the way around it. They chewed as far as they could.
Like all at one time, like when they
Yeah,
just decided
it was
to.
one season, and that's
Someone
what
had
they
some
did.
barber pole worms, and they
That's
targeted
what-
it.
yeah, come eat this, you'll feel better. I don't know, but my sheep are funny.
Do you have any chunks of things you haven't covered yet that you
Do I
want
what?
to?
No.
So at Toddy Pond Farm, they had 2 groups of hogs. This was not an experiment, it was just an accidental experiment. But the one group started stripping the trees like that, and just stripped a whole lot of trees. And that group grew way faster than the other group. So they and we think it was a parasite issue probably.
That's
But-
my dog. That's the bad dog.
I like that dog. Hi, Josh.
Yeah, that's the same maple that they eat in their pasture. He
But
was
when you
sitting
cut
there-
it, they still get excited about it.
Yeah.
Of course, they have somewhat of a browse line on the stuff they can reach, right?
Yeah. And they're kind of round. It's hard for them to stand up like goats.
So talk about when you dried the cherry. How much cherry did you dry that winter that you dried
That was
cherry
a big
for?
tree. I would say we had at least 10 to 15 bundles. This would be a bundle hanging in there, and we had an overgrowth of the cherries on the stone wall, so we were trying to get rid of them. And
Until I came along and said, we should just pollard them.
yeah, so.
But I gotta get over there.
This is what I'm gonna do. We're gonna do.
And then they come back up later anyway.
They do.
Because
and
the
you
sheep
can go
aren't.
back out like he does now, just with a backpack and just rip all the the leaves up and not even worry about the brush. That is interesting for me because I hate brush. I don't mind the leaves, but
Right.
you know, as you can see, there's little pieces of wood still in there from other trees that, you know, they've eaten the stuff off.
Right, good carbon for the bedding,
Yeah.
but hard if it's long pieces.
Yeah.
So, Dan from San Juan Island, we have two Dans
I
here.
was wondering, do you know what species of cherry that is, or what particular kind of cherry?
The taller ones are probably black cherry, right? Regular cherry trees, they grow big.
Yeah. I mean,
We have pin cherries and black cherries and choke cherries and maybe some other cherries.
choke cherries.
I know those three.
aren't they? Do
And
push it to
they eat them all,
Choke
and
cherries are smaller.
the bushes are small, but the leaves are big.
Right, but they're not, choke cherries are never full
A
size
tree. No, black cherry would be the tree. I think you have black
Pin
cherries.
cherries kind of.
And black cherries have real kind of long pointy leaves.
That's what they say.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you have black cherries. I've been in those trees. And cherry has a wilting issue, so everybody will tell you it's poisonous when wilted. So people are surprised that Susan and I feed lots of cherry to our animals. And I used to take it out when it wilted and put it back when it was dried. But the goats seem to know, and they don't seem to poison themselves, so I just let them have cherry. I try not to have it be their only choice on a, in a situation of that they're going to run out of food.
I've had cherry
But-
as the only choice for animals sometimes, and they didn't get sick. I mean, the first time, before I realized it was safe to feed, I, left to go visit my parents for a few days, and a couple of friends were looking after my animals, and there was some little goatlings, in a maximum security prison, basically, and we were clearing some brush for the landowner, and, I showed my friends, I was like, okay, you can cut any of the trees here, but just don't feed them cherry. And I came back and they only fed them cherry for like,
They got the directions reversed.
yeah, or they didn't figure out
These
the
things
tree
happen.
ID or whatever. And so maybe they were stripping them so fast that it didn't have time to wilt. I don't really know. I mean, but that was all they had was cherry. And that's also this year with my goats. They've gotten way more cherry than anything else because
It's really nutritious.
the landowner where I'm living, it's like I have all these stipulations of what I can cut, but I can cut any cherries I want anywhere because she thinks they're poisonous. So I'm like, great, I'll come over and eat all mine.
And so last year, one of my sample farms was Jackson Regenerational Farm, and they were still in Belmont, right near me. And they had this little bull calf they bought for $20 at the auction, and they raised him almost entirely on leaves. And he was 200 pounds hanging weight in the fall. But he, one day I came, there was something, I don't know, maple or something he didn't really like, because I was still offering him things, just, to refused completely, tasted, ate eventually, or ate immediately. Was my grading system. And he went to this wilted cherry and ate a little bit and was like, get me some more cherry. They're very clear telling you what they want once they know you can. But so he ate a little bit of wilted.
When we had the
He didn't finish it though.
cleared all the stone wall for me, as high as they could reach. And to this day, when you go out there and look, you can see where it's grown higher, but there's nothing. Where they ate everything on the stone wall. And that was where I had it fenced in. That's what I wanted them to do, was to, clear it. But it's just funny when I go out there and look on the stone
And it's
wall.
still evidence. How many years later?
It's been 4 years, 3 years anyway. I think this will be the 4th year that we haven't had goats.
Yep.
But the bushes were just bare, but they have this giant umbrella-like
Yep.
appearance to them now because they cleared everything off. with
That
the
browse
vine.
line.
Yeah. It's just really
Yeah.
funny.
Question.
Go ahead.
So the sheep will just eat the leaves, right? You don't need any of the
They
leaf
will,
bark.
they will eat a little bit of the bark. But
And they eat bark on softwoods, right?
yeah.
Like the pine maybe?
Yeah.
And spruce. And they eat what she calls cat piss spruce.
That's what I
Because
call
it
them.
smells kind of bad. And my goats eat a little bit now and again, but they really eat it.
They will eat
Those sheep.
And then your goats.
And it's spiny as could be. I mean, you wouldn't
like
think.
spruce is really picky, and they'll eat it.
Just wondering what percentage of with goats how much of the woody part of the branches? I mean, do they nibble up the thin branches,
depends what species it is and how tasty.
You mean the bud where the leaf is?
For my
Sure.
goats, they have to be able to bear against it. So that's the limiting factor, is whether they can bear against it. So if you like stick it firmly into a brush pile, they can strip better.
Okay.
If the tree is still rooted, they can strip really well. But my goats know that that's a no. Like, they have to have it be cut.
But they'll eat the whole wood if it's like 1-year-old thin.
Yeah, they'll go down to at least a quarter inch.
I mean, like, there's some of what I'm feeding, there's actual, like, wood, which is not very large diameter. And if they can, they'll actually, I haven't seen
Yeah.
sheep doing quite that, but.
And when you strip by hand, you're leaving some twigs in there
Yes.
up to like quarter inch?
Um,
Because I think Michael Walder, when he does that edible portion, it's like quarter inch.
yeah, it depends on the species, and I don't think there's anything that's.
It depends how fast it grew, because if it's off a pollard, you're going to have really juicy things that could be, 3/8 at least.
Yeah, actually.
And still not that woody,
Right,
especially if it's new growth.
right. I've had peach water sprouts that I was pruning that they ate stuff that was definitely larger than a quarter inch.
Right, and some of these willows here, the hybrid willow, or the willows that Jack has in the garden that we pollarded for the tree fodder day last year, there was like 3-year growth. It was like 3-inch diameter.
Yeah.
And I bet they were eating down that quite a ways.
I thought what you were saying, Susan, about the sheep learning from your goats is really interesting, because I've also observed that it seems like there's, we underestimate how much animals have culture and like learn from each other, and that the preferences on one farm versus another farm could just be like, oh, well, there was that sheep, and then like, that weird one taught all these others, and like, we
They
like
can
this
teach
stuff.
them bad things too, like
Yeah.
standing on the manger and eating from the top rather than
Yeah.
from the bottom. But I think it was more that they rotationally grazed beside each other.
Uh-huh.
And when the goats were up in the trees, the sheep were like, hey,
Getting interested.
I'm curious, I want to, so.
Yeah,
like,
something
it's
always
different.
tastes better if someone else has got it.
Right. But there was an article somewhere I read, a woman named Graham said that you
Right.
can teach your animals to eat the weeds that you want. And that's what I do with my burdock weeds.
Yeah, the bull thistles, the big thistles, my goats, like after 8 years of not eating them, I pulled some and they were wilted, and someone figured it out, and now they just eat right down the middle. It's a really good vegetable if you peel it yourself, actually.
So what do you do to teach them? You pick it and throw it in. Oh, okay. When you're weeding it, or weed whacking it, I should say, you take a great big armload of it and you throw it in there, and sooner or later they'll start nibbling on it. And now they wait, because I had chickens for 20-some years. I don't have a piece of grass in my backyard. All I have is thistle and burdock and quackgrass.
Because the chickens were weeding too hard on the grass.
Yeah, so this year we don't have any chickens, so I'm constantly weed whacking burdock, because that's what's.
And my goats like burdock also.
And we've been throwing it in for years though, because we always have had it in certain places, even when we had the chickens. So that's how we taught them. So now they'll try to reach through this little hole in the cattle fence, because some of it grows right there. So they keep the burdock on this side flat. It's growing up. But other than that, we try not to have it growing in the
But,
pasture.
I mean, again, they have access to long hedgerows if they just walk out further from the barn. These same sheep. They're not shut in there.
No,
They're just choosing the shade.
that's their permanent pasture for the winter. Everything is closed in.
Cassie?
I noticed there are some tasty looking maple seeds in some of the maple branches. Do they really enjoy the seeds?
Believe it or not, they don't usually eat the seed.
And that brings me to just say there's, plants have all these signals, and they say eat this part, don't eat this part. And I think there's a lot of plants that are happy to be browsed, but they want certain parts not eaten. And the tannins and other anti-feeding chemicals will be concentrated there. Terminal buds often are last to be eaten. Some plants like oak don't offer their bark, but they offer their leaves.
I haven't had.
And the seeds are often like that.
I don't know about you. Yeah, they what? They won't eat the oak.
Was that true in my study as well?
I don't remember.
So I gave you all a chart, and YNF is her farm. You can look under oak. I know it's hard to read. It's not a great visual.
We have a
but-
big oak tree, and when the leaves fall off that, or the bringes fall off, and we throw it in, I can't imagine them not running at the minute they saw something moving. But how else would he get them unless he just, and that's probably the hardest thing about farming is things like that. We had a bobcat attack a ram on his back, and he came out of the tall grass or the woods or whatever, and he got clawed all up on his back. And game warden tells you can't set a trap for him, but yet other people say the Maine Trappers Association said this law is to protect your livestock, so it's all different.
And then you just do what you have to do.
Yeah, quietly. I know.
Any other questions for Susan?
So, I know you said, did you say the sheep would eat the acorns? Did you remember? The sheep would, and they
Yeah.
do
And goats, and hogs, and geese. Geese if you crack them.
And are you incorporating other nut trees with this, or
I don't have any other.
but I mean, you could, I'm sure.
Chestnuts they would eat because in Basque country, the sheep were in the fall living on chestnuts and acorns that were all pollarded in the woods. Anything else for Susan? Okay, thank you, Susan. That was awesome. I'm glad the pictures worked too. And so now we have Karen Whitman from Ravenwood in Montville. Susan's in Belmont. Sai is in Flux, Belfast right now.
I might see if I can sit facing you with the computer here, but am I in the way? Tell me, am I in the way?
No, not at all. We can see the pictures.
Okay.
Well, I don't know for you people, but I mean, you're not blocking the light of it.
Cool. Should I start? Or should I wait? I can wait a second.
Just a couple people come back.
In the back. Okay. Yeah.
Is there anything you need to watch for poisonous wise? Like, just out of all these different things? there's
So, I can,
Laurel,
yeah, mountain laurel. I've heard of a young animal dying from,
which
have you-
probably also means rhododendron too.
except that I've seen my goats eat rhododendron.
Okay, well, maybe not. I've heard that.
But my goats know when to eat something in small quantity. And, white hellebore by the streams, which is not a tree, but supposed to be poisonous, and they just don't touch it until the slugs are eating it. Or sometimes when it's very early spring, they'll eat a little bit. They seem to know. But as far as wilted leaves, I've observed that box elder, which is here at MOFGA, I sort of pollarded one. I don't have any at my house. As soon as it wilts, they don't touch it. And ensiling it didn't totally improve it, but it also had gotten kind of old before I ensiled it. But ensiling might break down some of those things, those problems. Not sure. And the other one that wilts that people talk about is maple. But I've definitely seen my goats sometimes target a wilted maple that they didn't even want. The leaves have issues even fresh. They can eat so much and then they have to stop and eat something else. You can watch them do it every time. Dried, same thing. Eat so much of it, stop, they want to eat something else. Whereas like ash, they could just fill their bellies on, or white cedar, or many, many things.
Mountain laurel might be the only one that's actually dangerous enough that you couldn't feel
Risk
totally
it.
confident trusting animals to just know to try it and be know not
Right.
to eat too much. Mountain laurel.
Mountain laurel, it's wild up north really a lot in the clear cuts here, to the point of being a bee crop. And the bees, if the honey's not capped, it's poisonous. but once they cap it, they've evaporated all the poisons out, and it's good honey.
Well, I'd read that rhododendron honey, well, nectar, like there's certain areas, I don't know if maybe it's certain types, but there's a region of Scotland where beekeeping is no longer economically feasible
Because of
bees were getting poisoned by
the bees
rhododendron.
themselves were getting poisoned.
Yeah.
But bees here do use the mountain laurel.
Okay.
Because I know people would bring their beehives up for that in the clear cuts.
Yeah.
At least I had heard that. Yeah, good question. There might be more things. We haven't run into them. So Karen,
What about you?
you, I don't have any to know, and I haven't heard about it.
Maybe it's just the berries that are very poisonous.
Yeah, I almost think so. I almost think they might even eat it.
Okay.
There at my parents' house, there were some ewes. I don't remember whether they ate them or not. Good questions. Okay, Karen, I think we're on for you.
Okay, I'm just going to share a little about our farm and some of the infrastructure. It's a neighborhood farm, so basically there's 4 households that co-own some land together, and we have it set up in a way that we have all the households at one corner of the property. And so if you look at this map, this is an outline of the property, and the parts that we're working for farming and households are in these circles in the top corner. And so most of the land is mixed hardwood and deciduous forest. It's on a hillside, and there's a stream between us and the forest. And our neighbor is a gravel pit. So this is close up of the households. So you just can see that the households are interblended. These are not to scale, but we all own 2 acres ourselves, so we can do anything we want, and then we work the land together, the rest of it. So primarily the forest is protected in a way, and then we work both on our households and off of it. So I wonder if this is big enough to see. Okay.
Yes.
And so this is just the main portion where there's activity, and what we're doing is we're really starting to do a more intensive form of farming, a lot of human effort in it, and I guess I would say that there's some of us that are working more hard as farmers and some of us that are working as cheerleaders for the farm, and that's fantastic. The interrelationships are wonderful, and I guess, yeah, some of the principles you'll see as we come through. But historically, we've had just more of a permaculture gardening approach, and chickens and bees were pretty much our only animals. But now that we've incorporated animals, there's a...
Now that she met Shana and started letting animals go that direction last year?
3 years ago.
3 years ago?
3 years
Has it
ago,
been that long?
I was thinking about getting animals, and Shana said, I have pigs and goats, and we worked it out. So now...
And you took like 1 or 2 of each species of bird as well?
That's right. Yeah, you had a custom pack of 1 of each bird.
They all get along quite well.
Yeah, the birds have moved on. The birds were comical. We thought for a while that we had the ugliest chicken we'd ever seen until we realized it was a turkey. So it was a funny thing. And then we felt bad because it was a cute turkey. But so now what we have are some different animals. And so this is just a diagram of where we're working and what we have. So who do we have? Currently we have heritage pigs. Before we had 2 American guinea hogs that were from Shana, and now we have...
They just got tiny piglets. She raised them.
Yeah, it's tiny piglets. And they taught me an incredible amount of things. And now we have 2 other heritage pigs, and they'll be a bit bigger. As they're growing, I tend to miss the American guinea hogs, but I like being on the cutting edge or learning edge for myself.
What do you miss about the guinea hogs?
They're small size, and yeah, I think just the small size, knowing that they aren't going to get as big as these 2 fellas. But we'll see. I love the guinea hogs. Then we have Muscovy ducks. These aren't from Shana, but they could have been. And we got them to eat ticks. That was the goal, and also to eat other insects, and also just to diversify what we have on the farm. What's fun for me now is that if I find a tick, I'll go up to them with my hand and they'll eat it out of my hand. And then I tell myself this is what's happening, but I'll stand up and I'll spin around and they're inspecting the bottom of my pants for more ticks. And
They're very tame then. And she's a beautiful color.
They're very tame.
Doesn't look like my Muscovies.
No, she's
Couldn't have come.
Pardon me?
Couldn't have come from Shana.
Couldn't have come from Shana.
No, we should make sure to save both and get a broader gene pool here.
Yeah, we'll see. And then we have heritage chickens, and this is our first year with the chickens. And again, my goal for them is to have them eat ticks and break apart animal manure, and also just entertainment, but also working through some more of the mob grazing, kind of the Joel Salatin arrangement, or all the folks. There's a large list of folks that are, I guess, inspirations for what we're practicing. We also have sheep. We have some Finn and then some Navajo churro, and that's given us the capacity to compare how these different breeds are interacting. One of the landmates, one of my neighbors, is into felting wool, and so it's a coarser, like there's more choices, I guess. I don't know much about fiber arts, but this is part of that. And then we have currently one Shana goat. This is Pepita, and she spent most of her life, I believe, with Shana. And so now she's both a guard goat. She guards the sheep, and it's been amazing to me. One day I was walking the path to the barn, and we must have left the gate open, and she was out in the path, and I was ready for carnage. But no, she was keeping everybody in the pen, and so. She's a wonderful being and member of the farm family. So what do we feed our animals? And I guess mostly we're doing a mix of grass, pasture, and hay. In the winter we do hay, but then also we're incorporating leaf fodder. I think right now we're ramping up our systems, and then the dream is to go to just from the land, so that would be grass, hay, and leaf fodder as a combo, because we have that extensive forest area. Let's see. Yeah. But in winter, like a downed hemlock, every year so far, for the past 3 years, there's been at least one big hemlock that comes down in the storm. And every walk I go on, or I'll take the animals with me, the hemlock can get us a lot of mileage. So what are we feeding, or what kind of leaves do they eat? Mostly, I gotta tell you, they'll eat red oak, ash, beech, maple, basswood, fir, hemlock, white pine, black walnut, alder, autumn olive, black locust, honey locust, apple, peach, pear, etc. I mean, they will eat some of this at any point in time. Their interest is greater when I don't want them to eat it. So that's been the biggest lesson I've had. And so what I thought it was funny, Susan, when you said you teach them, because I was like, I just have to go, no, and then they're like,
and then they go for it.
They go for it. But I do.
But it also could be that you're.
Yeah.
What was that, Susan?
She needs to come over and visit me and go, no.
To get them to eat stuff.
And the other thing is that sometimes they just eat a little bit of it, and I am convinced that they're building up their gut bacteria to work on it. But it's that balance. It's like, oh, they didn't like it, or oh, they're waiting till tomorrow, or so it's an interesting mix for these types of fodders. One thing that I've been curious about, again, we have a system where there's an area that they have basically free range, and then there's an area where it's more intensive, and so they're teaching me in different ways in both places.
So it could also be that when you plant things, you tend to plant things that are very nutritious.
That is true. That's true. And I happen to get them bored in the wrong place occasionally or something. So in the winter, I love carrying branches when I walk. It's like multitasking in a very comfortable way. And so just bringing back hemlock branches and just continually throwing it into the winter paddock area, and they
Isn't that a beautiful barn that they have?
And then, this is in my yard, in my house, and I have a couple basswoods, and I have basswoods now that I've planted in other locations. But I've just kept this tree small, and it's not because, somebody's like, who would plant a basswood on the south side of their house? Well, I'm just keeping it really short, and it's a fabulous fodder plant, and it's part of the kitchen garden. I run out and eat the basswood leaves in my salads or in stir fries. And then, again, a lot of it's just manipulating when you're going to let the sun come through. So these are fir trees, again, in pretty much on the southwest side of my house. And I didn't want to cut the tree to lose all the roots that are working in the soil. So I just trimmed all the way up. And it's fun because it's like floating Christmas trees. Or, the branches, some of them were of interest to the animals, other ones weren't, I think because they were really old branches down low. But
Yeah, and they'll strip bark off of like the first 8 feet of the top and then kind of stop. Definitely the growing parts are the
Yep. So those are available.
interest.
So then another tree that we Shana came over and
That was
planted.
2 years ago, really?
Yeah. I
I
don't
thought that was last year.
No, I don't have a picture of this tree originally, and it's a large oak that's on the south side of my garden space.
Did I ever finish doing it? No.
You never came back. But,
No, it's not done.
It was a little scary because it was dark when you were way up there. It got dark as you were up there. It was scary for me, not for you.
Right.
But
I wander with goats. I have really good night vision.
yeah. So this tree, basically, unless Shana, you want to speak to what you did on it.
I topped things. You wanted it shorter, right?
Yeah, yep, so you cut it.
And I was like, well, we could just make it shorter and not cut it down. And it was quite climbable with an extension ladder. Did I use the extension ladder or a wooden? I think I used the extension ladder.
You used the extension ladder and then you didn't like it and then you went home and got your ladder.
Got my wooden ladder?
Your tall fir one.
Oh, okay, so that was enough. So yeah, so with the short ladder that you'll see later, I could get to the first branches and then just climb it. There's plenty of branches on that tree. And maybe as far as if I would have finished, I would have gone out the branches lower down and brought them back to something green nearer to just get more growth in reach for the future. But this is after it grew, right?
Yes, this is
because this is really bushy. It didn't look like that when I cut it.
No, you pretty much shredded it. You just left some of the branches because I think you ran out of time.
Well, and I'm sure I left branches also just to keep it alive.
You have to leave branches. And then you can see the little stubby top. Last year there was no green on the top, and I thought, oh, it's just this finger sticking up. And this year, lo and behold, it's totally greened up.
The same piece of wood.
The same piece.
That had nothing on it last year. So it held its moisture and stayed alive. That's so wild.
It was in a dormancy, and then it came through.
It was like drought last year. Maybe it didn't have enough water to get up there.
Yeah, it doesn't look to me like it's branches from below. It definitely looks like it's from that nubbin.
Yeah, I'll be interested when I go up next to see what's going on at the top of that.
So Shana can climb trees, so can I. And
Woohoo!
So basically on the north side of my house, now what I am envisioning is to have like my property, the yard where I have hazelnuts and a lot of sea berries and plants growing. But I also want to now create a bowl effect where all the trees within the close area are shorter, and then we come higher, higher, higher. And we'll be maxed out by my height of climbing. And
until you come and make a harness.
Until I make a harness. So what I did was I just used a little kitchen ladder, and then I climbed the tree because I'm the rookie version of Shana. And so I climbed up and I collared at the top of this beech, and then I also took a number of the branches. And what I like is that it's really filled out, and it's also towards the roadside. The road's quite far from my house, but it's still, I was like, oh, it'd be kind of fun to have it just be like this wall of green, and then also to get the fodder from the beach.
So you didn't shorten any branches, you just took some whole branches.
On that one, I was taking whole branches.
Yeah, and then you can wait and because of the more sun, maybe more sprouts will come and you'll have more smaller branches started, and then you can take some of the longer ones again.
Right, and then I have another tree where I did shorten the branches, too, and I'll show you that in a second. And then also we're having some mixed coppices happening now. So we had some just some area cleared out, and these little stumps are now starting to grow. The coppice, they're just taking off. I'll show you an image. Here's a maple that was cut this fall, let's say October, and it's already vibrant green. I need to fence it in because this area has deer access rather than the farm animals, but it's just a very vibrant spot. So in this spot, I also, before we had the other trees cut, I pollarded this cherry completely. So it was just a stump, but with the two pieces like that. And the neighbor didn't like the look, so we hung a flower pot off of it. And I gotta say that this spring I was nervous because it looked like a sterile stump.
I know, it was a very late spring. It made everybody nervous who has
And then I thought, well, maybe
newly
I
cut
just killed
pollards.
it, not a big deal. And now it's this amazing green thing that everybody loves. And so it's just so much fun to manipulate the park. I guess accept our role again as members of
Participants.
Our
Yeah.
Then this was the best picture I had of a birch that I pollarded the top of because it too was overly sunny or shading. And then the next picture, it's just this vibrant green bush again. It's probably about 15 feet or 20 feet tall, and it's just another source of fodder through coming time.
And birch tends to be early or mid-spring fodder and then fall fodder. And last year the fall window was longer than the spring window for my animals, but they're still eating it this year, which is late.
Yeah.
So it's such a late spring.
Yeah. So here's another ash just cut about 6 feet tall. Somebody just chainsawed it, so it's just a stump, and its diameter, I guess its DBH was probably 8 to 10, so kind of like, maybe we shouldn't do it. And here's just a picture from one year. You can see all the stumps coming, but this is the fall. And then the next picture I just took a little bit ago. It is a very vibrant ash.
Yeah, and sun is key.
Yeah.
Sometimes one that doesn't have enough sun will sprout up like that, but it won't last.
Right, and this one said.
But that's in good sun, it looks like.
Yep.
And Håkan Slott of the Swedish book there, the soft cover, says at least a third of a day of sun on your sprouting areas is necessary.
So similarly, another red oak that was cut at 6 feet tall.
So hence your bowl idea is such a good idea, because you kind of have to do an area. You can't just do a tree here and there.
So here's a red oak, and then this is what it looks like right now, and that's 2 years of growth. And I'm just letting it choose which branches to grow. I was a little, do I know? Do I select? And I decided to not mess with it because I knew they're vulnerable to that great of an impact. This is a beech that has some beech blight in it, and so I climbed up it and I left the.
And when you say beech blight, are you meaning on the trunk those?
Some of the blisters. And
the
top
blisters.
is thinner, yeah.
Okay.
And,
I haven't noticed the tops to be thinner in relation to that, but there's other things that beeches have also.
That's true. But so, anyways, I climbed. I made the ladder, like you cut the branches, and I
columnar form, fastigiate form, people might say. Yeah, where you're bringing the form in, but not all the way into the trunk.
Yeah.
What was the word?
Fastigiate just means columnar, like a column.
Okay.
You're making the tree kind of shaped like a Lombardy poplar now.
But definitely decrease the amount of shading it does on my other trees.
But you left the top because that was your limit of height.
Yeah.
And actually I found somewhere mentioning, there's definitely countries where that was done. And if you have good sun, the sides will still sprout, even though you didn't dampen the growth at the top.
Yeah, I was at a height where I didn't know if I could control which way the top would fall, and
that's dangerous.
Below it. Yeah. So then what are our systems? One of the systems we have is there's a stream between us and basically what we're doing kind of is like open savanna farming or pasturing. So the animals, I move through here for 10-day stints. I guess once a month maybe. And this is also the barns here, so they actually love it there. So the barn, it's open, they can go there. and it's alders and a number of other trees. They haven't damaged anything. I guess this area I'm fencing things in that I want to protect from them, and then on the other side of the stream I'm fencing the animals in, so kind of the opposite.
And there already looks like there's a browse line on those alders.
On the alders there is, and I'm very psyched about that, because they're very bay-shaped now, and unless they keep going, but I
Or bend them down.
yeah, I'm pretty psyched about what they've done.
Don't let
in that
Pepita
area.
teach them to bend everything down.
Yeah, she likes her height. So I guess it was just had this here so that there's the spot across the stream is the little piece. And then the barn, this is from the other side, and it shows there's a hill, so we're also working to prevent erosion or just hold on to the nutrients from the water that's flowing through. And so we're creating around the edges plant. Basically, I'm enamored with the European hedgerow. And so right now we're just planting as many plants as we can on the outside. This is downhill, so things with long, deep roots like the comfrey or the clumping bamboo, which could offer other uses. Honey locust, black locust, and then sea berries on the uphill side, and the white pine was inside the paddock. And I thought they were big enough, but they weren't. So the sheep
Are killing it.
they really girdled it.
This year my goats have girdled more than, like I've had pines in their paddocks forever, and this is the year they're killing them. And I think because they're using them for bug dope, they're rubbing it all over themselves and turning black instead of white.
So this is just a commercial for what I'm not using electric fences. I tried that, but I also think it's a very brittle form of sustainability. It requires a lot of components. So
brittle as in fragile, vulnerable.
It's a fragile, sustainable system through time.
Yeah.
Versus cattle panels, or you can make your own cattle panels with wood and T-posts, and then a T-post pounder. So, but I have a sandy base to my soil, so I can wiggle a T-post loose in no time. And I know some places and put it in, and I know other places that's not as easy to use. And so we're basically rotational grazing the animals through these areas and creating fodder rows, and then also just moving the sheep from piece to piece to piece to piece. Our pasture's not that good
So
yet.
that space between, is that a path or is that where you've got stuff planted?
This thing's planted. I'll show you.
That's so cool.
Here, I'll show you just one. This one's a diagram of it. So these are the rows that I have now plants planted, and this is roughly what we have. Like some pea shrubs, mulberries, red oaks.
Except for the one that the goats ate, no.
The pea shrub, the goat, yeah. But they're fenced on both sides, and the biggest lesson for me was that most of the plants did fine, but there was a couple spots where the plant was closer to the fence, and the goat or somebody or the sheep pushed through and could nibble it. But so these lines are hopefully going to be the alleyways for moving 2 cattle panels down,
Right.
As they continue.
And so if you need to make woven hazel traditional fencing, the Traditional Woodland Crafts has the directions.
So I'm growing the hazelnuts both for the nuts and for ultimately to do that. That is my hope.
That's very cool.
Setups.
I'd like to be part of that workshop. Try it out.
Yeah.
Try making some.
So here you can see from inside one of the fodder hedgerows. So one side's this old fence that I got from somebody, and we're moving it around, but now it's stationary, and then there's some cattle panels on the other side. And so I can go through the middle, and I just bring a hand sickle and just clear up the areas for the trees. And some of the trees are planted this year, but then other ones are maybe 2-3 years in there. So just throwing everything in there. That's where some of the manure goes from the barn in the middle. And ultimately we have, quite a healthy herd.
And beautiful greenery.
They do so much damage, so it's such a, I don't know, I heard so many different things about it, good things and bad things, and about how, I don't know if you can explain
Hogs.
the tree fodder piece of it as well.
So I was really hoping that Cliff Davis was going to do the presentation tonight that was scheduled, but he canceled because he has 2 employees that left. because he could address that a lot, because it's a hog and sheep operation, mostly hogs in Tennessee, and he's pollarding and coppicing for the hogs and for the sheep, I guess, but he's more into the hogs. And he's keeping 90% greenery recovery on the land also, so he's hitting it and having them hit it when it's like things are going to seed and they trample the seed in and then it regrows right away. It rains quite a bit there. But the tree fodder he's cutting and carrying from pollards or coppice cut low, pollards cut higher. And so I'm going to try to get him another year when he has better help. But I can say that on your chart there's my hogs, which are the parents of hers from last year. And they pointed to the beech when everybody else was done with beech, because beech is a spring fodder, and when the leaves kind of harden off for the summer, my goats stop eating it. And there's a day when my goats stop eating it. Once there were rabbits at my house that someone else had, and they stopped eating it the same day. Like, okay, those leaves are now mature and they're not good anymore. But the hogs were like, we want you to go up that tree, Shana. I'm like, okay. And it was like midsummer, and they just devour beech. They want those tannins. I don't think it was specific to last summer either. I think they might just really like them.
The hazelnuts we want, but the squirrels are eating all the hazelnuts, so we fed the squirrels to the pigs. Basically, you're keeping your resources in your system somehow. And I gotta say that the pigs are omnivores. They do so much better when they're eating squirrels.
And you can always keep the hind legs and the tenderloin for yourself.
Yeah, don't eat my hazelnuts.
Sears Mafia.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how we're doing on time, but are there any more questions for Karen? What time is it?
We're good. I mean, the last section before lunch was supposed to start at 11:30. It's 11:20.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't take a break, so that helped.
Oh, yeah. So, any more questions for Karen? And you can always catch us during, you're staying, right, the day? During the part of the afternoon anyway. You can catch some of us for more questions if you think of them. So, am I up next about giving a grant update? So someone else can hold the camera. Why don't you go to another picture? Oh, with that. There, that's a picture that we haven't seen. So that's little maples. They're only like this tall. In front of the area of quaking aspens, mostly quaking aspens, that are probably all on the same root, that are sending up sprouts all over the ground, beautiful sprouts. I have a picture of the sprouts next. And I was not sure that they were going to leaf out at all, because last summer, all these little spots that I left were wilted. In the summer, like, I'm like, oh wow. Which surprised me, because when I fell a poplar in the late summer or fall, cut it off the roots and it falls, and the goats eat it on the spot, eat all the leaves off and the twigs, little twigs, but mostly leaves. And I don't cut the branches off. The next spring it leaves out, it flowers, it starts to make fruit seed, and it's like last summer I had one with leaves on it all summer, even in the drought, with no roots. So they have a lot of water stored. And they're called in Swedish water trees, the birches and the poplars. So.
Well, could that also be that those leaves had shadier conditions and then all of a sudden they were in?
They were sun salted.
So it wasn't necessarily like water.
But it wasn't very, because these trees have such small tops. Okay. So they weren't that really. And the other thing is it's in a flood zone, so it wasn't that dry.
Right.
But anyway, the trees went into shock, and I didn't know if they were going to be alive. So I was very relieved when all the little twigs that didn't get broken off by the snow, because poplars are very brittle, so they break off, did leaf out this spring, and they did send out their catkins, and they did their thing. But still no new sprouts up there, only new sprouts on the ground. I'm still thinking, like the birch, that they may do it, they just may do it later. I'd be really pretty happy if some trunks stay alive, but I'm also okay to start a whole new layer of smaller pollards or poplar, which I know can work. The trouble with trees like this, if they don't sprout all over, it's disproportionate. So there's a colony guide in my files that's from Navarre, Spain, Basque Country, that's in English, actually. And they talk about efficiency of form. So you have your transpiration pulling the moisture from the roots up. In the Amazon, there's like -15 atmosphere pressure created by that in those trees. And that's, of course, what's driving your rain cycles, all that pull. But they can only pull so far if they don't use it to transpire. So a shorter spotted foam is much more efficient for a shorter, smaller top. So these tops are really small for getting stuff all the way up there. They already were very small for getting up that tall trunk. The trouble was there was nothing else to cut down to because there was no road up to here. So we did it on the chance that they'll live, and we'll see. And my dream would be that it would sprout lower down, and then the next time we can cut it lower and bring it down to be more of an efficient form. So anyway, the poplars are experimental, but the maples, the oaks, the ashes are all doing fine, and I had done things like this before other spots in my land. And the yellow birches, I need more on them, and they tend to have more lower branches to begin with, because they're just very shade tolerant. And they also easily sprout and make more things even in the shade. They just don't need as much sun for some reason. So there's the poplar sprouts. Don't they look luscious though if you're a ruminant feeder? And this is the nest because most of the wood that we did is all still there except for a few snap handles. That's snap. So that's the last picture. Yeah. So that's the future. I have to keep the goats out of there for a while, but we got other places to go. So questions? You've got your weird charts that I've now deciphered for you. You've got a reference list that's like not everything I've read in the last 8 years, but a lot of it got on there. And there's three or four articles about rain and trees in there, which should be evident from the titles. I didn't put my grant on there, but you can look it up on my website. There's links to the actual grant. There's also a whole page with all the pictures. So there's a place on the website that says data, a place on the grant page, because there's like 3 tabs at the top with the grant page, free Fodder seminars page, and home page, and then a resources page. And so pick the grant one, and then there's a little line that says data, and then it says like animal response charts and something else, and then photo folders. Go to the photo folders, and there's like folders upon folders inside the folders, all very organized. You can go to other farms, and you can see the cows and the sheep at the other farms eating all these wonderful samples. And that's my favorite folder. And then you can see in the trees in the demo area, there's charts about them, how we measured how long the piece was that we cut off and how high it was to that top cut, so you could add those two together and know how tall the tree was to begin with, and then how tall it was when we finished it. They're not exact. We were measuring a lot with the road instead of like bringing up a tape measure. But they're close. And we also measured diameters of the top cut and tree rings of the top cut, like how old that growth was up there, like what age the tree was when it got to that point, basically. And those tree rings are really bad on the maples because we probably could see what the tree rings were. We're doing a lot of guessing on the tree rings. But it gives you some idea, like how old was that piece we cut off?
Would the tree rings be how old the tree was when it got to that point, or how many years it's been since it got to that point? And wouldn't the rings up there be like...
Right, you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How many years it's been since it got to that point? Yeah. How old the pieces that you cut off?
Right.
Yeah, I said it wrong. Thank you.
Got a little hummingbird here.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, get it out before it comes to in case it does.
pictures had like a birch and things kind of had a lot of open sky. But if you have a type forest already where it's like the birch goes up and it just has, it's reaching for light.
We have those in here, yeah.
Are you trying to clear back more trees to get more light? Because if you're chopping
So we also, let me say, we also cut a lot of fir at the get-go,
to get more light in.
opened it up a bit.
Okay.
And actually then my goats really wanted to talk to fir this year in particular, and in the spring we like to strip bark over the top of the tree. And I might have saved more of those firs and just topped them if I had done it a year later. But we did leave the ones that had branches below 10 feet of the softwoods, and we left all the cedars, which was only like 2, and we left all the hemlocks, which was only like 2. The hemlocks were already getting collared by porcupines, but we collared them further. The one basswood was already collared by porcupines, and I didn't touch it. And I actually have a picture with it, but I don't think it made it into this file.
So you're needing to open up the canopy more.
Soil scientist who's focused for like 30 or 40 years at healing on woodland soils, and he's done a lot of about atmospheric depositions in the soils also, and effects on trees. So anyway, we're gonna pick his brain on Wednesday at my place. I think we're losing people. Are they going out to lunch or?
Resuscitating
Oh,
the
yeah,
hummingbird.
okay. I forgot. And normally I wouldn't forget, but I'm kind of like obsessed today.
Yeah.
So while they're doing that, I'm gonna put this in.
Actually, no, it's a CPR, but like, how fast? How many?
So, yeah, it's, it looked like a clear cut to me this spring when I went to my demo area, and the snow's all gone, and there's like, oh, it's fresh everywhere. But now the ferns have all come up back through it. Like, it was kind of bare over the summer because the goats were there with us most of the time. We were timing how long they were in there. We were subtracting a fairly random, slightly measured excretion rate from their weight because we were getting the dry matter. We were getting their edible portion weight by weighing them on the way in and weighing them on the way out, and then also subtracting an excretion like 3/4 of a pound for the herd per hour.
Did you have tethered or did you stay
No,
with you?
most of the time they were free, but we made a fence around the whole acre.
Oh, you did?
Just wire on like bicycle inner tube on poplar poles. I cut poplar poles in the clear cut. I didn't really want to buy a lot of stuff, and I already had this stainless wire, so I hit up all the bike shops for bike inner tubes and sliced them up and just tied it to the poplar poles with an extra knot so that it wasn't touching the wood.
So you had an electric little.
Yeah, and then I had a charger out there.
I see.
Yep.
So the bicycle tubes were just a sling to hold the wire in the air? Or I guess I'm not.
Yeah, the bicycle inner tube was just my tying material that's non-conducive.
Okay.
So it went around the poplar poles that were like small.
Yeah.
And then I tied like an overhand knot, and then I put the wire, and then I tied another overhand knot over the wire.
Okay.
So the wire was through the knot, not touching the pole.
Yeah.
And actually, for a while, most of them we were also putting a layer around it, under that, just in case it slipped or
So in ground. Yeah.
just make sure it was insulated from the wet post.
Yeah.
In the rain and stuff.
I wonder. I have access to a lot of discarded maple tubing, sapline stuff. I wonder if that would be good.
Yeah, well, on high tensile wire, they string little pieces of plastic or tubes onto the wire.
Yeah.
And they just like use a staple.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just put the wire through the.
So you have to string them on from the end and know how many.
Right, a bunch of them. And,
But,
yeah.
Or maybe you could slit them.
so it's kind of similar to that.
Right.
And
Push the wire through. Really high tension.
Yeah.
So I think I covered all the parts of my grant. Well, the tipping inside of it is so fun. I brought 2 barrels today, and one of them has leftovers that I haven't opened and looked at. I opened it and it smelled good, and I'm like, I better close it quick in case it doesn't stay as good for you guys to smell when we do the silage this afternoon. So I think we're probably due to have lunch. I didn't know the time because we didn't use the birds. Oh, we're way